we have to really be quite grateful for fossil fuels because they've brought us to where we are today. It's a great source of energy. It powered the Industrial Revolution. That energy really underpins this modern life that we live. So me and you, there's no way we could have this conversation without an energy supply powering our laptops and that internet connection, and also all of the stuff that we use has been manufactured, and we need an energy supply for that. So I think fossil fuels have served us well, but it's time to move on. But as you say, it's not really quite that simple. So solar panels, wind turbines, people think of them as zero emissions and perfect, but they're not. They're just better than what we have at the moment, and that's really great that we can take that step forward. And this is always going to be incremental, and we will make these changes over years. And I think, if we, maybe 100 years from now, if we looked at the energy system, I think it would be unrecognisable, but that change will happen over time.
Welcome back to Plant Fueled. I'm your host, Callum Weir. Today we're diving into one of the most important, misunderstood and controversial topics of our time: energy. From fossil fuels to renewables, from nuclear power to sustainability, we're breaking down what truly powers our world and whether the solutions we're being sold are as effective as we think. To help us separate fact from fiction, I'm joined by Yasmin Ali, chemical engineer, energy expert, and the author of Power Up. Yasmin has first-hand experience working in the industry of fossil fuels and also renewable energy, and provides us with a balanced, science-backed look into the future of power, what works, what doesn't, and what comes next. In this episode, we are covering a lot. Are fossil fuels really the energy? The truth about coal, oil, and gas, the role they've played in society, and whether they're as evil as the mainstream suggests. The sustainability myth. Are renewable energy sources like solar and wind power as green as they claim, or is there a hidden cost? The nuclear power debate. Is nuclear power dangerous? Or is it the cleanest, most efficient power source we've been given, but also been ignoring? And we dive into the future of energy. What realistic energy sources and solutions exist for the individual and governments? And what can somebody do to reduce their impact on such an individual level? This isn't just about science, it's about the power that fuels our everyday lives. Understanding where our energy comes from means that we can make smarter, more informed choices about sustainability policy and the future of our planet. So if you care about climate, your energy bills, or the truth behind renewable energy, this episode is a must listen. Now, before we dive in, if you're enjoying these conversations, the best way you can support the show, support the podcast, is by hitting that follow button. Like, subscribe, give a star rating, whatever the platform you choose allows you to do. It helps us reach more people and continues bringing you the guests you want and the unfiltered, fact-based discussions like this one to the table. So now let's get into it. Here's Yasmin Ali. Let's dive in. Peace and plants.
Yasmin, welcome.
Hello, how are you?
Yeah, not too bad. Recovering, but yeah, still alive.
Good. That's what we like.
I first became aware of the energy supply and fossil fuels, not in an in-depth extent, but in school, and that was going back maybe 20 years ago, to which consisted of a small project that lasted about a week, and then it was never really spoken about again. It was never really discussed in school again, and it kind of went like radio silence. And then I would say in the last 8 to 9 years, although clearly it's been a massive talking point throughout the world, it's made a huge resurgence in my life, and I've become more increasingly aware as things like climate change are more talked about. And especially with this podcast, there seems to be an overarching theme of more sustainability in various forms. However, energy production to an extent has always taken a backseat in my mind until I got gifted your book, Power Up, and I was absolutely hooked.
Fantastic. Yeah, I think people don't really think about energy systems so much because they work so well in like in the UK, we don't experience power cuts very often, so it's not something we think about. I guess it's when something breaks that we notice it, and we are heading towards a bit of a broken energy system because of climate change. So maybe that's why it's become a more important topic in the last 10 years or so.
Yeah, I would definitely say that, like, obviously, the more people do talk about climate change, the more different subjects are coming up, whether that be like the energy production, whether that be how things are farmed, and whatever the reason for different sorts of climate. It's just, yeah, it seems to be resurging everywhere. But when I picked up your book, I think I learned more in those pages about how everything works than I like to care to admit. Because I think in a lot of people's minds, people are just like fossil fuels bad, electric, solar panels, wind, good, but never really look into the nuances. And I think that's very much the mindset that it's just very much good, bad. There's nothing in between.
Yeah, it's never quite that simple, is it? When you start digging into things, so we have to really be quite grateful for fossil fuels because they've brought us to where we are today. It's a great source of energy. It powered the Industrial Revolution. That energy really underpins this modern life that we live. So me and you, there's no way we could have this conversation without an energy supply powering our laptops and that internet connection, and also all of the stuff that we use has been manufactured, and we need an energy supply for that. So I think fossil fuels have served us well, but it's time to move on. But as you say, it's not really quite that simple. So solar panels, wind turbines, people think of them as zero emissions and perfect, but they're not. They're just better than what we have at the moment. And that's really great that we can take that step forward. And this is always going to be incremental, and we will make these changes over years. And I think, if we maybe 100 years from now, if we looked at the energy system, I think it would be unrecognizable, but that change will happen over time.
Yeah, because I think as much as obviously fossil fuels have such a bad reputation, we wouldn't be in today's modern society without them. Like, 'cause I think when you look around at everything, whether you look at your car and how that's run, or how everything's working around us, it had to have come at some point. So if that's what we had back then and didn't have the technology to obviously have what we have now, then nothing would have evolved.
Yeah, yeah. So it is very much ubiquitous in our lives. And as humans, I think we do what we think is the right thing at the time. Although arguably we have known that fossil fuels are not good for the environment for quite some time and haven't really moved fast enough. So yeah, in some circumstances, we could definitely move faster. But it's a tough change to make when you've built up this entire ecosystem of power stations and energy extraction industry. So there's lots of people involved, which makes the change less straightforward. So we have to think about that, and we have to, if I don't know, take like Aberdeen, for example, in Scotland, where lots of people historically worked in oil and gas. If you want to shift the energy system to something else, you have to think about those people and bring them along with you.
I think for the people that aren't actually too familiar with who you are and the work that you do, who is Yasmin Ali?
So I am a chemical engineer by background. That's what I studied. And I have worked in the energy sector for 15 years now, which is kind of scary to think about. But I've worked in fossil fuels, so in power stations that generate electricity from coal and natural gas. I've worked in the oil and gas sector, but for the last 8 years or so, I focused just on clean energy. So I've worked for UK government on energy innovation. I've worked in hydrogen, so low carbon hydrogen production. And at the moment, I'm working on batteries that support the electricity system. But then I'm also quite passionate about communicating engineering and this hidden world of energy to pretty much anyone that will listen. So I do lots of presenting and talking, and that's how the book came about as well. So you mentioned Power Up, which I have here. That was like quite a proud moment for me when it was published last year, because I worked quite hard on it for a very long time. So yeah, that's
you can definitely tell you work hard, because you very much went into every different aspect of energy production, and I didn't realize there was so many different ways of. I think I knew there was, but like I think we just kind of forget that wind farms exist sometimes, and we see solar panels more and more these days, but like wind or air or water, you kind of forget exist on just an everyday basis, because they're not talked about as much, I guess, as the main culprits that you see, whether that be coal, gas, and electric.
Yeah, and there's lots that I didn't cover. So it's such a vast area. Like I didn't talk about geothermal energy, for example. But I tried to cover as much as possible just to give people a flavour and try to do it in like a logical way, because I think quite often when we think about energy, we either just think of electricity or we think of one type of fuel, and we forget the whole bit in the middle where you're moving those energy resources around, and then the bit at the end and how we use those energy resources in our lives. So that's how the book is set out. It's how we get, move, and use energy.
You mentioned chemical engineer, and for a majority of people, I don't know if they would know what a chemical engineer is, because obviously you've got various different types of engineers. But what is a chemical engineer? I guess let's start there. Like, what is it?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I didn't have a clue what it was when I decided to study it, so it's taken me a while to learn. But chemical engineering, I would say, is all about turning raw materials into useful products. So that's very wide, as you can imagine. There are chemical engineers that work in the food industry. There are some that, I don't know, work in drinks, brewing, so like Guinness or whatever. There are some that work in energy, like me, water purification. So really very much any product that we use in our lives, I can almost guarantee that at some point a chemical engineer has been involved, either in the extraction of the raw materials or figuring out how to turn that iron into a pipe or whatever it may be. Does that make sense? That's how I usually sort of explain it.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually didn't realize there were so many different types of actual chemical engineer, whether that be, as you said, food or beverages. Sometimes when you hear that, you kind of just assume that's kind of like a narrow kind of like tube of kind of, hey, this is what you do. It's just kind of one form, and that probably is the energy sector. But you don't realize there's so many different avenues you can go down with that.
Yeah. That was kind of why I picked it. I remember getting a leaflet when I was about 17 or 18, and it had all these different sectors listed that chemical engineers work in. And at the time, I was quite scared of choosing one job I just felt like I would be stuck in one job, and I didn't want that. So seeing that I would have all these options was quite attractive. So that's why I went for it.
Oh, so it was a leaflet that took you down this path. It wasn't kind of like something that you wanted to do from like a young age, because some people have such big dreams to become certain things, but it was just kind of a spur of the moment. I've looked at a leaflet and this is what I'm going to do.
Yeah. This is how I make my life decisions.
So your main focus has been hydrogen for a while?
Yeah, it's probably the last kind of 5 years or so I've worked in the hydrogen sector.
And I think that's also another concept that a lot of us aren't overly familiar with as well. So I'm guessing, what really is hydrogen, and like why is it so? Well, it's looked at as more like the green version of energy or greener version of energy.
Let me see how to explain this. So hydrogen it's an element. It's the most abundant thing that we have in the universe. So it's just an element that's out there. We can use it as a fuel. So it's an energy carrier, I guess you could think of it as. So the same with coal or oil or gas, these are materials that carry energy. Hydrogen is different because when we use it up, when we burn it to get that energy back out of it, it doesn't release any carbon dioxide. So it's kind of a better fuel for the environment if you look at it from that perspective. The challenge is, of course, there is one, otherwise we would have been doing this a long time ago. Hydrogen doesn't exist alone on our planet, so it finds other things and attaches itself to those things. So, for example, water is, the chemical formula is H2O, so it's hydrogen and oxygen. So to extract the hydrogen away, this is where you might have heard of electrolysis. I think people do this in chemistry at school, where you get some water and you basically zap it with electricity, and that separates the hydrogen from the oxygen, and you can collect that hydrogen and use it as a fuel. So you need to put energy in to get your hydrogen fuel. So this is where you then need a supply of green electricity to make this work properly. So really, when you think about it, if you can electrify something and you've got that green power source, then just do that. You don't need to complicate it and bring in hydrogen. But there are some things that are very difficult to electrify. So if you look at aviation, planes, the big ones that we use to jet around the world, it's very difficult to put batteries on there that are large enough to make that plane go. So that's where hydrogen could be a good option. Industry, so all these factories that use crazy amounts of natural gas to make the heat that they need for their processes, maybe hydrogen would be able to replace that. Maybe some modes of transport, like heavy goods vehicles. I'm trying to think of other examples. So we do use hydrogen today, but we make it in a very not environmentally friendly way. So we extract hydrogen from fossil fuels, and that process produces carbon dioxide, and we just release that into the atmosphere. So one thing that we could do, which is, I think people in the industry shouldn't really be arguing about this, is where we're using this type of, they call it grey hydrogen. So that hydrogen that's releasing carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, let's just replace that with low carbon hydrogen. I think that's a straightforward thing to do. And one example of that is ammonia production. So ammonia, we then go on to use that to make fertilizer. We put the fertilizer on our fields to grow crops. So that's one quite practical example. I went off on a bit there, so I'll stop to see if you have any questions or...
Yeah, I think so. You mentioned that, like, obviously to get this, you have to electrify something.
Mm-hmm.
But does that work with anything? And as long as you can electrify it, then you can get hydrogen from it? Or is it like there are certain substances to get this from? You can't just kind of electrify anything and get hydrogen?
Yeah, maybe I didn't explain that very well. So you need a substance that has hydrogen in it. So the main sources that we would use are either water. So if you want to make hydrogen by electrolysis, you need water and you need green electricity. And the machine, the electrolyzer that does the actual process. The other way to make hydrogen is from fossil fuels. So you might have heard fossil fuels being called hydrocarbons, and that's because they're made up of hydrogen and carbon. So a similar sort of thing, not just with electricity, but heat as well. You can split hydrocarbons apart and get that hydrogen out. But that's a more polluting process from a carbon dioxide emissions perspective.
Yeah, I think that's, well, from my understanding, and there's not much understanding, is the fact that obviously whatever is like producing carbon at some point is obviously bad for the atmosphere. It's just obviously and the world and the climate. However, obviously there's some things that produce more and there's some things that produce significantly less. So it's more looking for the option that, you know, produces the lesser. But whereas obviously in like the case of, like, you know, coal, oil and the others that have significant amount in comparison to like hydrogen.
Well, it depends how you produce that hydrogen. So I think if someone says, here's some hydrogen, use that, it's better, then the question you should ask is, how did you make this? But yeah, it's definitely always about what's the least bad thing. So even when we think about wind turbines, the blades have been manufactured in a factory. When wind turbines are installed, you need loads of concrete, which when we make concrete, there's carbon dioxide emissions. So everything has an environmental footprint and an impact. But I think you have to think about which is the least bad thing for us to do.
Yeah, I think everything, no matter what it is in the world, has some sort of impact. So it's trying to find the lesser impact of the out of the best that we have at this moment. Like I'm guessing until probably further on in the future, we might find something that produces zero impact. But that's also, you know, further on in the future, and it might not be possible.
Yeah, I don't know if I believe anything will be zero impact, but maybe lower impact. Yeah. So I mean, if we crack nuclear fusion, that's going to be a very big step forward, but we're not quite there yet. Other than that, I think we have loads of incredible technologies that we've invented and discovered over the last hundreds of years. So I think we can, and we are making good improvements and good progress.
You mentioned that obviously it was a leaflet that put you on this journey. However, I was wondering if, obviously, because your childhood was very different to the average childhood that you would have in, let's say, the UK. So obviously you grew up in, you know, Iraq. Was it in between the Iraq-Iran war and the Gulf War?
Yeah, so in the early 90s. Yeah, so I was born in Baghdad, and then spent the first couple of years of my life there. So I think for me, I didn't really know any different. I just thought that's normal. This is how how people live their lives. We were there during the first, I think the beginning of the first Gulf War. So I do remember that kind of wartime environment, and I remember having power cuts as well quite frequently. So this would be a much better story if I said I got into the energy sector because I had power cuts as a child, but that's not quite the reality. We moved out of Iraq, moved to the UK when I was about 11 years old, and I was just not really that interested in anything. I was just living my life as a teenager, having forgotten about the power cuts and had a very secure supply of energy. So never really thought about the energy systems until I went to university, studied engineering, and really what set me on this career path was at a summer placement that I did at a gas-fired power station. So I spent some summer holidays working in a power station, and that was really that light bulb moment where I was like, oh, okay, this is where the electricity comes from, and there's this entire hidden world that I did not know about of power stations and pipelines that carry fuels and cables that carry electricity and thousands of people that work here and make it happen, and we just flick a switch and the lights come on and we don't think about all of that. So to me that was kind of incredible, and I think I wanted to work in a sector that had an impact on people, and given that we all rely on energy all of the time, that made sense.
Yeah, because I assumed that there may have been some kind of correlation to obviously you having power cuts and trying to get water at certain times of the day, that may have kind of planted that slight seed into you. But obviously, it turns out that's right? not the case.
Well, you never know, because I think those childhood experiences probably have an impact on you in ways that you don't understand. So yeah, maybe. I think I was probably more aware of it than maybe someone who hadn't had that experience.
Yeah, of course. But I assume, as you said, this would have been the norm for you as well. You wouldn't have known any different to anyone else in the world that may have never experienced that.
Yeah. But it's actually quite a common experience. So for the book, I spoke to a woman that works on microgrids, so kind of small power systems for remote communities. And she was telling me, she's probably about my age, so grew up around, the same time. She grew up in California and in quite a remote area. And she told me she remembered they had power cuts all the time. So for different reasons, but she had that similar experience. And she said they had a power cut one winter and had to take everything out of the freezer and put it outside in the snow. So, but yeah, she also got into the energy sector, maybe because of those early experiences. So yeah, it's maybe not as uncommon as you think it is.
There's been multiple people that I've experienced that still have this now. Specifically, so I lived in Australia for 2 years, and the very rural communities there. Once you so I had to work at a banana farm when I was there for 2 months to stay for a second year. However, it was a very rural community, and the power outages would be every few hours. It was never a consistent. They'd never have Wi-Fi. You would never have internet or lights or gas. It was always click of the switch and everything would be out for a good few hours.
Mm-hmm. And did people? I guess people were quite prepared for that. So
there was people had backup generators and things like that. Whereas I had just moved there, so I had no idea what to actually do, or the shops weren't open, and I was like, how do I live my life? Because I've been so used to living in the UK and having an abundance of kind of electricity and gas, that when I was stuck in a rural community where there was nothing, I was like, how do I actually navigate what's going on with the world right now?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's I think we have to think about that, for that zombie apocalypse scenario.
So your work has spanned in amongst, oil, gas, and kind of every different energy sector there has been, or you've at least kind of had an overview of what's going on. But obviously, at first you did work in more oil, gas, and coal, if I'm right.
Yeah.
And obviously now with there's so much more talk about climate change. Is there that kind of sense of maybe that you weren't doing the right thing at the time, but obviously that was your job, and then it's that kind of guilt that it's very much, this is what I've helped produce?
I don't have the guilt now, but I definitely did at the time. So when I left university and got a job in the more fossil fuel industry, that felt right at the time, because that is our energy system, and I wanted to be part of making that work. But about, I'd say, like 5 or 6 years in, when I was working in oil and gas production, so actually doing that drilling and extraction and production of oil and gas, that was when I started to really question, am I doing the right thing? Am I using my engineering skills in the right way? And around that time, there was that growing concern about climate change, and I was learning more about the impact of fossil fuels on the environment. So I definitely felt guilty then, and that was when I made the change. So that I think I'm going in the right direction now. So I'm not going to look back and regret it, because I think it's just what I was doing at the time. And when I realized I wanted to do something else, I did something about that, if that makes sense.
Oh, absolutely. And I think as well, like, hindsight is a great thing as well. Like, you can't regret things that have pushed you in the direction that you are in. Like, obviously at the time there was a bit of guilt for you, but now that you've moved past that, you can see it and be like, hey, that was part of my journey to where I am now.
Yeah, and I learned so much, and I met some absolutely incredible people. And I don't point the finger at people in the oil sector now, because we rely on it. So until we need those engineers who are doing an incredible job in those sectors, and we need them until we transition the energy system completely into something new. And lots of people are now moving into more of that renewable energy focus.
So fossil fuels, they are a big talking point. They are obviously still widely used and obviously shaped modern society. But if we dive into the different fossil fuels, like oil, it's still probably one of the ones that we use more on an everyday basis. But what is oil? Because I think everybody just, they've got petrol, they've got oil for cars, there's things, but I don't think anybody really realizes the impact it's making, or how we get it, or what it's actually doing, and how it's actually shaped our society.
Do you mean, what is it like I take that quite literally as an engineer, so I'll probably give you like a scientific answer. I don't know if that's what you mean, or...
Oh, that's great. Yeah, we love a scientific answer.
Yeah, I mean, oil and like fossil fuels are basically dead creatures from millions of years ago that have been they got buried underground. So it's plants and marine creatures, and they've been buried underground for millions of years under heat and pressure, and they get turned into hydrocarbons, which we mentioned already. So this mixture of hydrogen and carbon, and it's really energy dense, which is why it's so great, because we can extract oil, coal, gas from underground and turn that energy into something useful, like electricity, or refine crude oil into petroleum that we can put in our cars, or aviation fuel. So it's really quite versatile and energy dense, which is why it's difficult to switch to something else. But we are in that process now.
Is there a chance that, obviously, because there can only be a certain amount of this, like I'm guessing it's not an ongoing supply, because obviously once you've taken it up, you have to wait another however million of years to recreate more. So like in terms of oil, like I'm guessing there's still quite a lot left. However, there is only a varied supply, and once that's gone, that's gone.
Yeah, it's definitely finite. I haven't looked at the numbers. There's usually forecasts on how much we think is left, but there's probably lots left. But it's about how much does it cost you to get it out the ground. So you might have heard of tar sands in Canada.
Mm-hmm,
so that's another, that's a source of oil, but it is quite expensive to get that stuff out of the ground, just because of the composition of it. So at some point, and we're already there, so it's cheaper to produce electricity by wind or sun than it is to put up a power station and use coal or gas. So it becomes about money, really, at some point, and what's the least cost thing. And at some point we'll get to a place where it's just cheaper to do something else. So we stopped taking the stuff out of the ground. I think we'll see.
Yeah, because like that's the one thing that I think I know. Like when I learnt about that in school, that was the one that people kind of hyped on about the most as, the one that's obviously producing, the most climate change. I don't know if that's overly true. Because obviously what I learned in school was 20 years ago, and my knowledge of that is just so little. But like the emissions from oil, I'm like not the best.
No. And again, it's all in the chemistry. So if you're burning something made of carbon and hydrogen, that carbon attaches to the oxygen in the atmosphere and we release carbon dioxide. And there's also all sorts of other pollutants. So I think back in the 1800s, they had little coal-fired power stations in the center of cities. And that was pretty bad for people's health. So now we put them out of the way, but it's still not great when it comes to air pollution. And the same with petrol and diesel cars. We all know this, if you're standing next to a car that's driving by, it's not great to breathe that stuff in. So it's not just about carbon dioxide and climate change, but pollution in general. And
Of
yeah,
course.
I mean, I think there is this argument that natural gas is cleaner, so you do get fewer emissions, but it's still not. I think we have stuff that's better than that. So why would we do something that's not as good as what we could do, if that makes sense?
Of course. And then there's coal. And coal, it still surprises me that at some points is still used in some places, not as much anymore. But when I imagine coal, and I think when most people imagine coal, you imagine steam trains, coal stations, but you don't really think too much about that. It's still kind of in existence and people are still using this in certain countries, not so much in like the UK.
Yeah, so coal is used for electricity generation. The UK actually shut down all its coal-fired power stations last year, I think, September last year, the last one closed down. But yeah, there's lots of coal-fired power stations in many other parts of the world. Again, it's if you've got it in your country and you can dig it up, then it might make sense to do from an economic perspective. Not good from an emissions perspective, but until those countries have an incentive to not use coal anymore, they're probably going to continue doing it, and then it gets quite ethically tricky, because this is I don't know if you ever follow the climate conference that happens every year. So there's usually an argument that goes, well, you guys polluted for the last 100 years, so we get to do it now. And then the countries like UK and Germany or whoever argue that no, we now know what the impact is, so you guys should stop polluting. And then it goes on like this, and there's an argument about who should pay for it. And I don't know, I think I'd have to ask a philosopher about all of this to figure out the answer.
So where does coal come from? Because I think so much so that we just see it as like black kind of rock that just burns. But is it created the same as obviously oil is, where over years and years and years it's like dead dinosaurs, animals, whatever? Is that the same concept with coal, or is there a whole different way that's created? And the same again is like there must be a finite amount of that as well. It's not just it's just not replicating on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, no, it's not recreating itself. It's not renewable. It's the same kind of process, yeah, as oil. The difference is coal is made from dead plant material, and oil is, I think it's dead like tiny little sea creatures. So it's not dinosaurs. it's like much. I thought that as well, but I was corrected. It's like very small organisms and like bits of trees or plants or whatever. So yeah, coal is more. I guess it's the vegan version.
I'm actually disappointed to find out it's not dinosaurs, because I've been told that my whole entire life that like these are just dead rotting dinosaurs and we're just using them in cars.
yeah. It's nicer to think that it's not dinosaurs then. So that's a bit grim, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And then I think gas is another one, and I don't know if people realize there's obviously two different types of gas. You've got natural gas and gas, or are they the same thing?
Same thing. I would say. So it's all again different levels of hydrocarbon. That's what it comes down to. It's so petrol is a liquid type of gas. So yeah, gases. Yeah, I think people just use the words gas and natural gas interchangeably. Again, it's one of those where if it matters, you should ask, where did this gas come from? But there's different types of chemistries of it, I guess.
With it being natural gas, people, I'm guessing, would assume that because it's natural, it's fine, it's healthy, we can just kind of use it, and like there's going to be no repercussions because it's just there.
I've never thought of that before, but that's a good point. Yeah, no, it's we get it out from underground. It's a fossil fuel. When we burn it, it emits carbon dioxide. Yeah, maybe it gets a bit confusing because in the US, when they say gas, they're talking about gasoline, which is the liquid, what we might call petrol in the UK, that you put into your car. So the naming gets a bit confusing. You might hear about biogas, for example. So there are other ways of producing gas from natural materials that are seen as more environmentally friendly. Some people disagree, but if you take, if you grow some sort of plant, you can then process that into a gas and use that for energy. And the argument, the argument is that those plants are going to be replanted and they're going to absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. So what you emit from your biogas will be reabsorbed by new plants. So that's biogas.
Okay, so yeah, I didn't realize there was obviously that. So I know there's that misconception that obviously gas in America is petrol, and yeah, when I first actually got to the States, when I first went there for a few months, I had no idea what they were saying when I was going to the petrol pump and being like, I need petrol. They're like, gas. I'm like, I don't know what you're on about. Is there a difference? And turns out there's not a difference.
Yeah, it's just different names for the same thing.
And with natural gas, is that another thing that can eventually run out? Because I don't know if that's renewable.
No, yeah, it's the same sort of, yeah, same as petrol, coal, formed millions of years ago. So we'd have to wait another few million years.
And how is gas formed? Because I'm sure obviously you got the plants and you got marine creatures, but gas is, I'm guessing, not liquid.
No, yeah. So it's kind of the same process. It's just about the length of the carbon chain. So if you have fewer carbons, then it's a lighter material and it will boil at a lower temperature. So that's why it's a gas. So just to make things even more confusing, you can turn natural gas into a liquid. And this is what we do. So if you extract, let's say, so Nigeria is a country that produces a lot of natural gas. They have it underground. If China wants some of that, what you can do in Nigeria is cool down that natural gas until it turns it into a liquid, and then put it on a ship and ship it across to China. And in China, they can then regasify it, so turn it back into a gas and use it however they want to use it.
That's absolutely fascinating because, like, I think of gas as something that you just can't see, which obviously is the case, but then you can turn that into a liquid, which then you can see. And that has just blown my mind. Like, I don't understand how this witchcraft works.
It's like, I guess if you think about water, it's just the different states that materials can be in. So water is a liquid, but if we heat it up, it turns into steam, which is a gas, kind of. Or we can freeze it and it becomes a solid. So you can do that with, I think, most materials. Yeah, like if you take a metal and you heat it up, it will melt into a liquid. And I guess you could probably turn metals into gas.
It's absolutely fascinating because I think for someone that's not in that world, like knowing that can happen and you can just create different states of a substance in various different forms is mind blowing. Especially when, like, obviously we know that obviously water and with condensation can then disappear into wherever it goes, but like I don't really think of anything else where, like, other than water that can just kind of evaporate and turn into something else, which is absolutely mind blowing. But I think when obviously all three of those being fossil fuels, is there one that's ones that's better than the other? Or obviously they're all going to have like an environmental impact, and that's not great. However, is there ones that are better and worse?
It depends, which is usually the answer you get from an engineer. Yeah, it depends how you're using it. So if let's say we're generating electricity with those three things, natural gas would be less bad. There's fewer emissions associated with it, but they're all kind of bad in their own way.
Yeah, of course. Nuclear. I
Yeah.
was under the misconception that nuclear energy was bad, because I think when people hear the word nuclear, they're kind of like, oh, weapons. And I think that's probably the misconception for the large majority of people. They hear nuclear, they automatically assume this is probably the worst thing that could ever happen. But you hear nuclear bomb, you hear nuclear weapon, whatever. However, it's quite a good energy source from what I gather.
Yeah, so I've never worked in the nuclear sector, so writing the chapter about nuclear was a bit of a revelation for me as well. And I think I realised that I had that subconscious fear, and it sort of makes sense when you unpack it and think about it. Yeah, people associate nuclear with the Cold War and with weapons and the bombs that were dropped in Japan. But we can use it to generate electricity, and it is safe. And people also think about the nuclear accidents that we've had, like Chernobyl. But when you actually look at the history, there's not been that many accidents. It's really quite a safe industry. And the benefit of nuclear power is the emissions are very low. So if we had gone down a nuclear route like France has years ago, we would have much lower emissions, and it would be easier to get to net zero emissions targets. But yeah, it's quite a controversial way of generating energy.
Because I think the only concept I have of nuclear power stations is from The Simpsons, which isn't the greatest of data points to take it from. But I just envision, green sticks, which then create some sort of energy, and there's always some sort of disaster. And that's where I'm getting all my data points from, is a country at the moment when it comes to nuclear.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that particular power station has a great safety record. But yeah, it's about, again, kind of at a scientific level, and this is stuff that I don't fully understand because it gets into quite complicated nuclear physics. But yeah, it's using the reaction in certain materials to generate electricity, or I guess heat that we then use to generate electricity. So it's called nuclear fission, if people are interested. That's what we use to generate power at the moment. And then we mentioned fusion as well earlier, which is a concept that hasn't quite been developed enough for us to be able to use, but hopefully we get there in the future. But yeah, I guess I wish people would not label things as good and bad and give them more of a chance, because we really need to get on with this energy transition, and we need to use every tool that we have in our toolbox. And I think if people are able to think of things a bit more objectively and in a more level-headed way and not rule out certain technologies because of fear, then we can get on with this a little bit quicker.
I completely agree with that. From obviously my field of work is very different. Mine's human nutrition. However, like, foods get labeled good or bad. However, there's nuances to everything. And some things are ultimately the better choice. However, everything has a downfall, no matter what it is. It's just about the nuances and how you're using them, and if they're like on an everyday basis. And I think that's the same with anything in kind of any field. So when it does come to energy sources, how are you using these things? Like, if you're going to use them on an everyday basis, there's probably big downfalls to it. However, if you're using it on a sparingly, it's not going to be as detrimental as it would be.
Yeah, and I think there is lots of misinformation out there and a lot of opinion about what technology is good and bad. So I think as an industry, as an energy industry, we need to do more to bring people along with us and to explain what's going on. I think we're a little bit like, oh no, we know what's best and we'll get on with it. But that's not really how it should work. We need to explain to the public and everyone what's going on and why we need to do certain things.
So with nuclear, there is obviously so many pros to it, but the one con to it, I guess, is you can't really dispose of it very well. It's not easily gotten rid of. You have to kind of store that for a while.
Yeah, so you're talking about the waste from
the waste
power station process. Yeah, so after they call it the spent fuel. So after all the energy's been extracted from that fuel, you're left with something radioactive. We then store that in ponds for years and then package it up into concrete and store it somewhere else. And we just haven't quite figured out what to do with it in the long term. But there are, so the example I came across, which is very good, is from Finland. So in Finland, they are developing this permanent nuclear waste disposal site where they're burying their nuclear waste very deep underground in this very stable rock formation. So they'll just put it down there in tunnels and it'll be out of the way. And over the years, it will become less radioactive and safe. So there are things that we can do to store the nuclear waste. The other thing to say is it's quite a small amount of waste compared to how much waste you get out of other industries. And because you only need a small amount of fuel to generate large amounts of energy. So yeah, there are solutions to these problems.
I think I found that one actually one of the most fascinating ones in the whole entire book, because I was like, this is just absolutely mind-blowing, because obviously there is so many misconceptions about what it is, and obviously how things are stored and how future generations obviously need to kind of know about it as well if it's down there. But it was just such a fascinating subject for somebody that has had such a big misconception about that kind of energy source, because it's underutilized, I guess, but I think it's a lot of the time it is because people's basic knowledge is that it is this bad thing.
Yeah. And just to go back to nuclear waste for a minute, when I spoke to someone from the company doing the waste disposal stuff, and I was asking him, how do you communicate to people 1,000 years from now that there's this dangerous stuff buried underground, because they might not speak the same language as us. They might just be completely different creatures to humans of today. And he said, we don't communicate it. So what you do is you bury the stuff and you seal everything up and you let the forest grow back over it. And people just never really need to know that it's down there. There's nothing valuable that they might want to mine in the future in that area. And I thought that was quite fascinating, that you're burying the secret and not telling anyone about it. But it makes sense.
With the hope that nobody's actually going to pick up.
But I guess
there might future people might be curious minds and see that and be like, wow, what's that? And then open something that's quite impactful.
Yeah, but I mean, it would have decayed quite a bit. It wouldn't be as radioactive, so hopefully not so bad. And I'd like to think they'd have the technology to know what was going on.
You'd hope so. You would really hope so. There was, I think, solar power. Solar power is one of those ones that I've actually seen a lot more of, especially living in Australia. Solar farms are everywhere. You go wherever houses are full of solar panels. My best friend at home has solar panels in his house. I don't know how effective they are in the UK because it's very cloudy and grey. Mm-hmm. But solar panels is one of those big ones that seems to be taking off recently.
Yeah, and the reason for that is because it's so cheap now. So, the cost of the technology has come down to levels that are lower than anyone thought was possible. So that's quite incredible to see. And then you think about the sun is showering us with huge amounts of energy every day. So we might as well be making use of that. And it doesn't have to be solar panels. There are other ways of using the energy from the sun. So in some ancient civilizations, they would orient their homes to face the sun so that in the winter they're getting that sunlight in, and then in the summer the way that the house is oriented avoids the summer sun so that your house stays cool. And I think we've just forgotten those quite simple methods of building as we've had more and more oil and gas, and it's become easier to heat our homes and keep them cool by using electricity or gas. And we've stopped thinking about how do we design out the need for heating and cooling. But yeah, solar panels. Again, sorry, I've gone off on a tangent. Yeah, they do work quite well. So even if it's cloudy, you still get electricity generation out of them. Not quite as much, but you still get a decent amount. Yeah, like I know people in Canada who have solar panels and they're able to run most of their home from that. If you combine them with batteries, you've got quite a powerful energy system there, because you can put lots and lots and lots of solar panels, more than you need, and store the excess electricity in your battery and use that in the evening, or use it when it's not sunny.
I was wondering that, because obviously with places that are so cloudy, or they don't see as much sun as, let's say Australia, such as the UK, is there like do you get as like, because they're still clearly working, but do you still get the same amount of strength as you would if you were to be somewhere sunny, or is it just taking the rays from somewhere?
They work on light rather than like sunlight, if that makes sense. So if it's daytime and you've got daylight, you will have some electricity generation. But yeah, obviously if you're in the desert in India and you have 360 days of sunshine a year, then you're going to get more electricity generation. But yeah, it's still an effective technology, even in, I don't know, northern Sweden, less so in the winter when you only have a few hours of daylight. But in the summer, it would be quite effective, even if there's clouds.
So it is still quite a worthwhile way to go, even if you are in the cloudiest of place. Like, you are still going to get energy from it. Because I think that was another misconception, that I was like, if there's clouds, nothing. You're just not going to be heating your house. You're not going to be having the electricity. It's just going to be pointless.
Yeah, I mean, it depends. It's on a case-by-case basis. And I think, again, sometimes people think one technology is going to solve absolutely everything, but it's going to be a mix, and it depends on where you are. So if you live in Australia, yeah, go for it. There's loads of sun around, so let's put some solar panels up. If you're in the UK, it's quite windy here, so let's make use of that, put up wind turbines. If you look at Norway, they have a lot of flowing water in their country. So Norway is pretty much, I think, more than 99% powered by hydropower, so that flow of water. So it really depends on the geography of a place and what are your natural resources and how can you best make use of them. So yeah, like if you're in Norway, you might not bother with solar panels because your electricity system is already clean because of the hydropower.
With solar, is it as sustainable? Oh, it's more sustainable than coal, gas, and oil. But is it completely sustainable, or is there still like issues with solar?
I mean, it's not perfect. Nothing is perfect. So the solar panels are manufactured. So when you manufacture them, you're using probably fossil fuel energy, and you're mining materials that are needed for the solar panels. So in the birth of a solar panel, there is there'll be some emissions involved, and at the end of their life, I don't know how good solar panel recycling is. So that might be another area for improvement. But if you compare the emissions per unit of electricity, it's a lot, like much, much lower than it would be for coal or gas. So I think coal or gas or oil would be in the hundreds of grams per unit of energy, whereas solar would be in the tens.
Wind energy.
Yes.
That is one that I think is, you see a lot in the UK. You go past like wind farms, like ones in the sea, and they fascinate me. They're not the nicest looking of things, and I think that's more. I think that's a lot of people's issues with them more than anything else. Is they're just a bit dull to look at. But also when you go past them, they're quite fascinating to watch them just all turning one by one. It is fascinating.
Yeah.
Like obviously there's issues with recycling a wind turbine.
Mhm.
And same as you mentioned with solar power, but is wind turbines, are they as beneficial as made out to be? Because obviously in the windier countries like England, they do have a lot of uses.
Yeah. I mean, yes. Again, it depends on geography. So the UK is pretty great for wind and offshore wind. Yes, there's again like solar panels. Yes, there are issues. So again, it's a thing that's manufactured, and then at the end of its life, you have to figure out what to do with it. So, as you pointed out, the turbine blades are not easy to recycle because they're made of a mixture of different materials. And historically, I think they've been sent to landfill or burned, which isn't great. But there are companies that now are thinking about how you design the wind turbine blade in a way that makes it easy to recycle at the end of life. So I think we'll get there with that. And that's how we should really be designing all of our products. So, if you've got a mobile phone, or if a company is designing a mobile phone, they should be thinking about what's going to happen to it at the end of life. How can it be taken apart and reused and recycled? So it's the same design principle, I think, that should apply to energy infrastructure like wind and solar panels. But again, when you look at carbon dioxide or greenhouse gas emissions per unit of electricity produced, it's very low compared to other stuff that we've been doing over the last 100 years. So it's such a good step forward. And on them not looking nice, I don't know, maybe we should have like a competition and get people to design what they would like them to look like. Is it the color? Like, what is it that you don't like about them?
Oh, I'm not overly partial about them. Like I think they're fine. I think they're. I think the majority, like a lot of people that I do know, when we go past like a wind farm, they're like, "Oh, that's ugly. That's like an eyesore." However, I kind of find them fascinating because I'm just kind of watching them slowly go round,
Yeah.
which I'm assuming is actually probably not that slow. It just looks slower than when you're looking from a distance. Anything looks slow.
Yeah. But I think it might be that people aren't used to them. So I find when you talk to younger, like kids, they don't really care because they've seen them. They've grown up with these wind turbines around, so they don't see them as an eyesore. It's the same with pylons. So people seem fine with the pylons that we have already, but don't want new ones. So I think it's just about what you're used to having in your environment. But I think you have to think of the greater good. Like, we need these things. Otherwise, we're not going to have an environment left to look at.
Are you? I'm guessing from your reaction, you're a fan of how the wind turbines look.
Yeah, I find them quite soothing to look at. And for me, they're like a symbol of hope for the future.
Obviously, if we take away the fact that they're not that recyclable, are they the better source of, like, obviously geographically it's the same with anything, but if that was to be the worldwide like version of like energy for everywhere, would that be the better state of energy that we're getting it from? Would be wind?
I think you always need a mix. So I can't really rank them. And when you think especially with renewable electricity, with renewable energy, you need that mix because the wind isn't always blowing, the sun isn't always shining. So you need to like hedge your bets in a way. So maybe it's a still day, but maybe it's sunny. So your wind turbine's not spinning, but you're getting electricity from your solar panels. So you always need that mix. And then if you've got some nuclear in the background, that can just tick away and produce your baseload electricity that you need in the background. Then if you throw in some batteries, you can start to store some of the excess wind that you have and use it later on. Or one thing we didn't talk about with hydrogen was about storage. So what you could do is use your excess electricity in the summer to produce hydrogen and then store that in like an underground salt cavern or something, and you can store massive amounts of it. And we do this with natural gas, actually. We store gas underground for the winter. And then, so you've got your low carbon hydrogen stored in the summer, and then when the winter comes, you can take that back out and maybe use it to generate electricity or do whatever you want to do with it in the winter. So that's called interseasonal storage, where you're kind of stocking up for the winter.
it's just fascinating to me how there's so many different types and there's so much we can do to kind of get the energy we need, and it is just a fascinating kind of space that you're in.
I love
and
it.
I think like
It's good
with
fun.
with renewables, obviously we're looking at becoming more renewable in the future, and like do you think we're far off being obviously probably in the next 100 or so years, or maybe less? Is it looking favorable to have a completely renewable future?
I'm quite optimistic, but that's just my nature. We're not. It doesn't look good when you look at the numbers now. So I think we're still on like 80-90% fossil fuels. But if you look at the rate of growth of renewable technologies, that is growing quite fast. So it's possible that we will catch up pretty quickly. But yeah, it's a global problem. So if the UK decarbonizes, which it's doing a good job of so far, as I said, no more coal-fired power stations. There are some days where it's like only renewable electricity, or renewable electricity is meeting the vast majority of the demand. But if the UK decarbonizes and no one else does, then we still have this climate change problem. So the challenging part is getting everyone to work together across the world to be coordinated and decarbonize.
That's probably a lot harder said than done. It's getting everybody to kind of agree on everything.
Yeah, we've been trying to do it for a very long time.
Obviously, innovation's definitely key in all these areas. But is there new energy sources being created or being looked into at all times, or what we've got now and what has been created? Is that it's not the end of it, but is there anything kind of new in the pipelines, or is it very much it's still we're just working it out as we go along?
There's some, I think, like iterations of things that we've already done. So I mentioned fusion. A team that I used to work with in government is looking at space-based solar power. You'll probably like this one. So putting equipment like satellites in space to capture the energy from the sun up there, where you're not going to be affected by day and night, and then beaming that back down to Earth. Please don't ask me how it works.
How does that work?
There are like things on the horizon, but I think we've got quite a good basis of renewable technology to work from. We have sort of talked mostly about electricity, but a lot of our emissions come from transport, so that we have to replace the petrol and the diesel for transport systems, which we can do with electrification of passenger vehicles. But you think about like ships and planes and trucks, there are plans and there's a lot of innovation going on into making those sorts of liquid fuels in more sustainable ways. So there's something called sustainable aviation fuel that you can make from bio crops. So you grow a crop and then you turn that into a liquid fuel, or you can use hydrogen and combine it with a source of carbon from somewhere to make like a synthetic petrol. So yeah, there's that kind of stuff which is in the innovation stage, probably a little bit more advanced in the innovation stage, but not at commercial large scale readiness yet.
Like, is there a chance? Because obviously we're seeing a rise in like electric vehicles, but can that be like brought over to things like ships and planes and things? I don't know if I trust getting on a plane run by electric. Like, I don't know why that is. Like battery powered, like on a long distance journey, I guess.
I mean, no one's going to let you get on a plane until it's passed all of the regulatory tests. So I wouldn't worry about it. It would, if it happens, it will be very safe because we've got international standards set up to make sure that people are safe when they fly. So yeah, it wouldn't be any more dangerous than what we do today.
Yeah, because I think some people find it hard to deal with the fact that electric cars exist, let alone obviously having things like that in the air being electric. I think people were like, I think it's just having time for people to kind of adjust more than anything else, because they're still kind of like, oh, coal, oil and gas is the best for running a car and ships and stuff like this. However, obviously we know that's not overly true in the climate scheme of things. However, obviously being run, that is a totally different subject. But I think it's taken people
like people forget that oil and gas are really dangerous substances. They're like flammable, corrosive, but we know how to manage them. As you know, there's safety standards and engineering standards that make sure we're using those things safely. So we're doing the same thing for other sources of energy.
Yeah, I think people probably forget that like everything has to go through vigorous testing, and it's not like you're about to go get in a car that it has a very low percentage rate it's going to succeed. Like that thing is going to run. It may not be the best at first because obviously innovation needs to happen,
Mm-hmm.
and it can only get better and better with time.
Yeah.
For the individual though, like
Mm-hmm.
for someone that's listening to this and being like, hey, I want to change, like I want to be more sustainable with my energy, but I don't know how. Like on an individual level, what can actually someone do to make their life a bit more, climate friendly, sustainable, especially when it comes to energy sources?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I'll give some thoughts on that. But I think I know some people get very anxious about the climate and maybe blame themselves, and it's important to remember that you can do things as an individual, but you're part of such a big system, so you're not going to be able to change things yourself. So you have to look at what you can do as an individual, but also as a society. And so I would say, start with learning more about the energy system and the interaction with climate change. And you can do that for your own country. So if I use the UK as an example, a lot of the UK's emissions come from transport, and that's because people put petrol in their cars and drive around. So then think about, okay, what can I do to drive less? Can I walk? Can I cycle? Can I take public transport? So that's a good first step to take. And it's not going to be possible if you live in like a village somewhere and there's no options, no public transport. You may have to take your petrol powered car, which is fine. Then there's, so again, UK heating is another big contributor to emissions in this country. So can you insulate your house so that you need less heating? You could think about installing a heat pump, if that makes sense. So that's an electrically driven heat source. What else could you do? You could look at whether you can get a renewable energy tariff from your energy provider. Some of them offer those, but I think if it's more expensive and not affordable, then that might not be a good option. So that's some stuff around the energy system. You could, in lifestyle, I think there's things we can do. So consume less is usually a good overall piece of advice. So can you fix your broken devices or broken things instead of going out and buying a new one? Can you reuse? And then, recycling is a whole other topic that I probably won't get into. And then, like, political engagement, I think, is important as well. So when you have the opportunity to get out there and vote, do it, and look at what the different political parties are offering in terms of energy systems and climate. So the current government in the UK has this ambition of having a clean power system by 2030, which is very exciting. But yeah, so get out there and vote, and then hold those politicians to account. So if they're not delivering, don't vote for them again. I think those are a few things that people can do.
No, I love that. I think they're all things that people can actually do on an individual level instead of worrying about how they kind of place in society as a whole. Like, because obviously one small thing and leading by example can always lead to a kind of domino effect.
Yeah,
and
you did forget one thing, actually. Sorry, I forgot one thing, which is probably relevant to you. I think about a fifth of our greenhouse gas emissions come from farming, and that's mostly from ruminant animals, so sheep and cows. So one thing that I think is quite easy to do is to reduce your meat consumption. It's pretty simple. And if everybody does it and we have less farming, then we reduce emissions. But obviously, that has knock-on effects on people who work in farming. So we would have to think about that.
Yeah, I think that's one of the issues that I do come across quite a lot. Is obviously helping people to reduce meat intake or take away meat intake altogether. But it's also, when the farmers are displaced, it's how do you then help them, and whether that be like plant-based farming or any other sort of kind of like agricultural that's better on the environment, whether that be growing oats for oat milk or whatever. Just helping people move away from that in the is somewhat helps the sustainability action of everything.
Yeah. I guess some of it is quite cultural, isn't it? When you've got a family that's farmed cows for generations, then it just becomes, we have to be quite sensitive about how we handle that. But yeah, I mean, on an individual level, eat less meat. It's pretty simple.
Absolutely. And I think that was actually a good segue, is the fact that if you do want to learn more about energy, then there is a certain book that you can pick up. Which was Power Up. And I got gifted that book. And when I first got a book on engineering, I was like, I don't know if I want to read this. But I think it's one of those things that sometimes you judge a book by its cover. And I know you shouldn't ever do that. However, it was probably such a cover. It is quite a cool cover. I do enjoy the cover. I also enjoy the fact that it's so green as well. Like, it stands out. It stood out amongst the bookshelf. However, when somebody handed you a book on engineering, I was like, is this for me? Until I opened it. And it's not just engineering. You've made it accessible to everyone with fun stories and actual things that actually happen to you that kind of hook you in. And then you kind of got that, accessibility of teaching somebody with various things that you've done. So the helicopter being dunked underwater, which was wild that exists. That blew my mind.
Cool. Yeah, that was part of the offshore survival training that I did to be able to go to rigs and platforms in the sea.
Yeah, I feel it was one of those books that I actually, after all, couldn't put down.
Oh, thank you.
At first, I was kind of like, engineering, and then I was like, oh, this is fascinating, and it truly was, because you've gone into detail of like every different energy source or the majority of them anyway, and it just blew my mind to somebody that thought they knew quite a lot. And turns out I knew so little.
I'm very happy to hear that, because I did want to write something for people that don't have a technical background, and I wanted it to be fun. So you're like the perfect audience.
Yeah.
And if you enjoyed it, then I did my job well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the thing with such a subject like that. It needs to be fun. Otherwise, you're not going to really bring a large proportion of people in. But it did exactly just that, and like the stories that you had in your life as well that were intertwined into the book were truly fascinating.
Brilliant, thank you.
So, if somebody does want to find you, if they want to find you, if they want to find your book, where can they go?
The book is available in bookshops, so you can go to websites like bookshop.org or Amazon if you're into that. And there's an audiobook as well, which is on Audible and Spotify. And if people want to find me, I have a website, which is engineeryasmin.com, or I'm on Instagram at engineeryasmin.
Amazing. And as new things develop and there is new, will there be a power up too? Or is that enough writing done?
No, I really enjoyed writing it, so I wouldn't say no to another book, but I think I need to find another angle or subject that I want to write about.
Amazing. Yasmin, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for your time. It's been truly amazing. You've opened my eyes completely to the world of energy, to what I assumed I knew, which was, I think, the Dunning-Kruger effect of I thought I knew so much more than I actually did. And you've opened up my eyes to a whole new world. So thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Yeah, keep learning. Keep looking into it.
I will do. I will do.